Hello, good morning. Good morning and welcome to this week's Learn with Lorna, episode number 232, where we are looking at the subject of school subjects. My name is Lorna Steele-McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service. We have 4 archive centres in the Highlands of Scotland, in Inverness, in Wick, in Fort William and in Portree, where we look after historic and some current records relating to this part of the world. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer, and High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland. There's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series. But if you're able to donate towards our work, and if you're in the UK and able to gift aid towards our work, we're really appreciative of that. So welcome to episode number 232. Thank you so much for bearing with me with my groggy throat last week. It's definitely better today. Thank you to those of you who got in touch with advice of different throat pastils, medications and all sorts of things. That's very much appreciated. Hopefully you can see a difference. So this week we are looking through school logbooks, school files, statistical accounts and other record series to learn something about the subjects taught in schools in the past. To see how it's varied over time, to see how sometimes what's taught depends on the location, and to see what the subjects that we choose to teach and who we teach them to, what that says about us as a society and what it has said about us historically. I'm absolutely open to favourite subjects going in the chat, so please do share that. Whenever I speak about historic school subjects, people who were at school in the sort of 60s and 70s tell me that they hated nature study. I hear that a lot. But yeah, please do share those comments and I'll see them coming up. There is no doubt that education is key to both shaping and reflecting societies and communities. This is an extract from the first statistical account for Scotland, so written in the 1790s, not relating to one parish in particular on this occasion, but an appendix to the whole thing, entitled A Letter on the State of Education in Scotland 1799. And it's a long article and I'm not going to read it all, but I wanted to just share this as an opening thought. It is the ultimate object of every great legislator to render his country powerful and happy. To be powerful and happy, people must be virtuous and enlightened. Virtue and knowledge are not the growth of a day. They must be begun early and continued long, take root in childhood and advance with riper years. They are the fruits of education, and in proportion as education is conducted with liberality and care, its fruit will arrive at excellence and maturity. Which I thought was a really interesting thought to go in with to this episode. So what subjects have we used to create the powerful and the happy, the virtuous and the enlightened, while very much bearing in mind that what we consider virtuous and enlightened is really changeable over our history, and some of the things that we would see as very progressive, or that they would have seen as very progressive, we would not today. So that needs to be borne in mind as well about what entails virtue and enlightenment. Anyway, where do we find this information? We can find it in school logbooks, particularly HMI reports, the inspectors' reports that appear in school logbooks, in school admin files, in newspaper reports, in statistical accounts, in school magazines and school board minutes, private collections including letters and school reports, and even looking at school photos. You know, we can see in our collections photos of children getting their bike riding training or getting their how to cross roads safely with the police. You can get all sorts of information from photos as well. So I'm going to pull examples from some of these and also just share a couple of my favourites on this subject. So let's start by looking at the first statistical account published in the 1790s and see if there are any references to education and specifically to the subjects being taught before that key date of 1872, the Education Scotland Act. So before that we have a wide variety of schools being run by churches, by borough councils, by the Scottish Society for the Propagating of Christian Knowledge, by charities, by subscriptions, you know, a real mixture of who's running schools and what they're teaching in those schools. So if we go to the first statistical account for Inverness, then we can see some really interesting detail about the academy in Inverness. The magistrates and gentlemen of the town and county of Inverness, and many of the gentlemen of the neighbouring counties, have long considered an establishment of a seminary of learning at Inverness, on an liberal and extensive plan of very great importance to this part of the kingdom. At length, in the year 1787, a committee was appointed to consider of the most proper measures for bringing their purpose into effect. An extensive correspondence was immediately commenced, and subscriptions were opened in Scotland, England, France, America, in the East and West Indies. An enclosure of about 3 acres was purchased, and an elegant house was built in front of it, consisting of a large hall and 6 spacious apartments for classes, library, and philosophical apparatus. The subscription at present amounts to above £6,277 5 shillings and 3pence. And the magistrates, beside their private subscriptions included in the above, give out the public revenue of the town yearly to the institution about £70 sterling. The house is provided with a rector and 4 masters. In the first class is taught English grammatically, in the second Latin and Greek, in the third writing, arithmetic and bookkeeping, in the fourth Euclid's Elements with their application, plane and spherical trigonometry, mensuration of solids and surfaces in all its parts, geography with the use of the globe, navigation with lunar observations, architecture, naval, civil and military, practical gunnery, fortification, perspective and drawing, and in the fifth, being the rectors, are taught civil and natural history, natural philosophy, chemistry and astronomy. The salaries of the masters are as follows: the rector, £50 in a house; the teacher of mathematics, £40; the teacher of writing, arithmetic and bookkeeping, £30; the teacher of Latin and Greek, £40; and the teacher of English, £30. The fees for each session are, to the smaller of the first class or teacher of English, 6 shillings; to the master of the second, 12 shillings. So it goes on detailing the different class prices. But it goes on to say, at the desire of the Highland Society of London, there is a class opened for teaching of the Gaelic language, with a salary from them of £15 a year, to which the directors have added £16. There is besides a prospect of an addition to the Gaelic teacher's salary from the Highland Society of Edinburgh. There is likewise a dancing school and a music school well attended. They are under the patronage of the magistrates. They are detached from the academy, and there are besides in the town and parish of Inverness another 10 schools, 4 of which are established by the Society of Scotland for Propagating Christian Knowledge. In these 4 there are no less than 230 scholars, and in the other 6 there are about 200. So you get a really interesting picture of what's happening both in the town but particularly in Inverness Royal Academy. And not only does it give great detail about the subjects being taught, but also about the relative value that's placed on those in terms of the teacher's wages. It's interesting to see, let me go back to that I think the mathematics teacher was being paid less. Yeah, the mathematics teacher being paid less, and the teacher of writing, arithmetic and bookkeeping less again. You'd think those would be quite central, important subjects. There are some standard subjects in there that we would still see in our curriculum across the UK and wider. So chemistry, English, geography, mathematics, drawing, but also some less common. I don't know, did anyone else study the application of Euclid's Elements? Because I did not. There are some of those subjects likely connected to the level of society who are attending this new academy. The fact that they're being taught Latin and ancient Greek is going to be of limited help in daily life in Inverness, but it would be key to an education university at the time, which many of those children would be destined for, many of those boys would be destined for. But other subjects that we see in that list are very much connected to what's happening in the world and what's happening with technology at the time, just as lessons today are. You know, when I go into schools all the time, and I see the way subjects are taught, the conversations that are being had, constantly adapting to the world situation, to the climate in all senses of the climate, and the changing technology that pupils are having to contend with. So in that example from the 1790s in Inverness, we see there navigation with lunar observations, naval, civil and military architecture, practical gunnery. And in 1793, when that was written, Britain was at war with France and much of Europe was in turmoil. The French Revolution was kicking off, and we are about to enter, in a few years, the period of the Napoleonic Wars. So these young men, these boys, are being taught in subjects relating to military abilities and military reality. It's clear from that entry that the push for Gaelic to be included came from outside the school. And the story of Gaelic education is a really interesting one, and it's a significant anniversary for Gaelic education, Gaelic medium education this year in Scotland. But we hold various letters and documents relating to this down the centuries. We hold a letter from 1849 written by the Inverness Town Clerk, Alex McTavish, to John Mackenzie at Bank of Scotland about the importance of Gaelic education. He's writing because there's a ladies' society in Edinburgh who are organising a sale of fancy work for the support of Gaelic schools in the Highlands. And McTavish states in his letter that the language is more deserving of attention than the Highland music, dancing and games that have seen a resurgence. He goes on to add, Gaelic schools have done more good than any other means adopted of late to improve the moral condition of the Highlander. In most cases, when a man reads Gaelic, he becomes a reader in English. And now so common is the reading of Gaelic that a periodical of great merit is extensively circulated in the Highlands. Just as an aside, I came across a really interesting extract in the Dingwall statistical account that talks about the fact that people think in Gaelic. So even if you teach them to read in English, they're still thinking in Gaelic. So they've got that kind of dichotomy of the way their brain is functioning, which is really interesting. Another letter details the need for Gaelic-speaking teachers, presumably because what they're realising is that that ability for the teacher to translate between the pupil's native language and the language they're being taught in will make it very much easier for them to understand what they're actually being taught. So, if we move to the second statistical account and see what's being said there, and again the second statistical account produced in the 1840s, still before that key date of the Education Act of 1872. So if we have a look first of all at the entry for Rogart. Education. There are 3 schools at present in operation in the parish. The parochial school, a school supported by the General Assembly, and a Gaelic school supported by the Gaelic School Society. In the parochial school, English reading, writing, arithmetic, bookkeeping, mensuration and land surveying are taught. In the General Assembly schools, English reading, Gaelic reading, writing, arithmetic and sometimes the rudiments of Latin are taught. In the Gaelic school, the reading of the Gaelic only is taught. Mensuration, incidentally, is to do with measuring. If we have a look at the second statistical account for Kingussie, it says, in the parish there are the parochial school, 2 seminaries supported by the Society for the Propagating of Christian Knowledge, one of which is a female school, and 1 supported by the Glasgow Auxiliary Society, and in the Inch district, 1 school supported by the General Assembly's Committee. There is also an infant school maintained by individual subscription. Besides these, there have been for some years past 2 aid schools during the winter and spring months in remote and necessitous parts of the parish, supported by the Inverness Education Society. The salary of the teacher of the infant school is £10, besides some prerequisites. The branches taught are English reading, writing, sewing and knitting. Latin and mathematics are taught at the parochial school. That entry for Kingussie also refers to a library of 300 volumes which pupils have access to. I found that one interesting for Kingussie because it's a really good example of the mayhem of the education system prior to 1872. There are schools being taught by the SSPCK, there are schools by Glasgow Auxiliary Society, General Assembly, Church of Scotland Committee, Inverness Education Society, aid schools, just in one parish. So you really get a sense of just how many cooks are involved in this at that point. But of course the bulk of the records which shed light not just on education but on the subjects being taught in schools come after 1872. So if we have a look at some extracts from school logbooks from across the Highlands, we'll find all sorts of detail. His or her Majesty's inspectors would visit the schools to assess the teaching, and that would then be copied into the school logbooks. That report would be copied in. And those reports, which can be found right across all our school logbooks, are full of information about the school's progress, about the pupils' progress, and they make some really great reading. So here are a selection from across the Highland area. This one is from Conan Bridge in 1882. This school is faithfully conducted with improved results on the whole. Arithmetic is good in the first and second, pretty good in the third and fifth, good in the fourth, and moderate in the sixth. Reading is pretty good, but an effort should be made to get rid of local peculiarities of pronouncing certain vowels. Dictation is good in the lower standards, fair in the upper. Geography good except map drawing. History of the fourth very good, of the fifth and sixth good. A good and promising beginning has been made in specific subjects. I regret that unnecessary talking during the examinations prevents me from recommending the highest grant for discipline. I feel like reading the shipping forecast, reading all those good and moderates. But it's interesting to see the standards across the age groups, but also that, again, that persistent getting rid of the local peculiarities of pronouncing certain vowels, getting rid of the native language, getting rid of the native dialect is so such an influential period in what happened with the language. If we move to Skerry in Sutherland, this extract is from 1880. Inspector's report for 1879. The new premises entered in May are handsome and commodious. The writing desks, however, should have shelves or slate racks. The work of the school was very well done. The standard subjects had very few mistakes. The grammar, geography and history were very good, and the intelligence of the children was very satisfactory, all the more striking as English is a foreign language to them. 16 children from Island Roan put in a very good appearance. This one is from Laird, and it talks about a specific set of lessons being taught for a reason. 1896, December the 7th. An attempt is being made to prepare some of the pupils for a musical entertainment to be given in the drill hall to provide funds for the school soup kitchen. Most of the afternoon attendance is to be devoted to singing in view of the above object during this week. The entertainment comes off on the 11th. And then finally, because this one just made me chuckle, this is from Torrin and Skye. I don't think I have a date for this one. Summary of the Inspector's report on Strathtorrin Public School. It is very evident that the school has been diligently taught during the past year. Much of the work is very praiseworthy, but it is necessary to aim more at fluency and distinction in the reading and repetition, and more accuracy in spelling. The arithmetic of the senior scholars is marked by care and intelligence. That of the juniors, however, is less satisfactory in these essentials. Singing is hearty if inharmonious, and the sewing may very fairly complies with the regulations. The organisation and discipline deserve the relative highest grant. Navigation as a specific subject is taught with creditable success. So, first of all, absolutely loving singing is hearty if inharmonious. So basically, you're singing loud but terribly, so please stop. But also just that reference there at the end to navigation as a specific subject, because of course this is being taught in Skye, so navigation is relevant. Sometimes school logbooks contain a timetable, and these are fascinating when you get to see the teacher writing out the structure of the day. So you're seeing not just the subjects being taught, but how those days were being organised and the order things were being done in. So the Skerry school timetable for 1875-76 starts, so it lists across all the standards, so all the classes down the side, and then all the periods of the day going across. And we can see that all the classes, the older classes 4, 5 and 6, are starting with prayer roll, Bible, New Testament, shorter catechism and Psalms. then going on to writing on their copybooks for 20 minutes, and arithmetic at their seats for 40 minutes. Then collective English, including history, and reading alternatively. They have a half-hour break, and then at 1:30, geography and dictation for 30 minutes, then arithmetic at their seats, girls sewing, boys mental arithmetic, and then 3 till 4 p.m, higher branches singing and close. And we can see that the younger ones are writing on their slates, and that they're doing dictation and drill. Also interesting that the whole school, excuse me, the whole school is finishing their afternoon with singing, which I found quite fascinating. And the fact that the younger ones, in the morning they spend time doing their letters and figures on slates, but then in the afternoon they're writing copies with pencils. So again, we see that changing technology and how that's influencing what these students are learning. If we go and look at the Linwilg timetable near Aviemore for 1920-21, we see again, all these school days start at 10, incidentally, but we can see they start with scripture every morning, then arithmetic, reading and general intelligence, writing and composition, nature study and poetry, drawing, oral composition, and then again, girls sewing, boys arithmetic, singing, and finishing on a Friday afternoon with fairy tales. So it's quite interesting just to look at those and to see some of the differences. We can see in those timetables the differences between the boys and girls curriculum. And that is something I've mentioned before, is absolutely mind-blowing to the young people I work with today. They just can't get their head around the fact that you would be taught different things. Another thing I find interesting from school logbooks, school files and school board minutes are the references to the equipment needed to adequately teach. So I've referenced they're writing with pencils, they're writing with slates. There was a reference in one of those extracts that I read about map drawing, so the equipment that's needed to support that. And I've mentioned in a previous episode, I'm sure, the very tragic example from, I think it was Balnain School, which says in the school files that the school has a playground which is a quagmire and one broken piano, which is heartbreaking. But of course schools need equipment. They need the things that will enable them to teach what they're trying to teach in a way that will get through to children. So if we have a look at some of the examples that show the impact of having or not having the right equipment or the right learning space. So this example is from Fodderty School in 1876. The school premises are very commodious. The apparatus is very defective. New maps, ball frames, clock and coloured pictures to hang on the walls should be supplied without delay. The seats in the classroom should be provided with supports for the backs of the children, and screens must be attached to the gable windows of the main room. The order is fair, but there are attempts at copying, which if is observed in the future will endanger the grant for discipline. So not only saying we need those, the abacus, we need the clock, we need maps, but also that the seats should have supports. The children should be supported. There should be screens over the windows. Those children are not going to learn if the environment they're in doesn't support learning. The next one is from Fornitius School in Ardclach in 1903. So actually I'm not going to read 1903, but I'm going to start in 1905. The annual report. This school has been taught with great sympathy and care, and the results generally are very satisfactory indeed. The infants acquitted themselves very well, especially in writing. It is a pity that there are no desks in the infant room. Higher up the school the work is thorough and good, but some development may be looked for. Reading and recitation should be more audible and expressive. A shelter is needed in the playground, and a school library should be provided. And then coming on into the beginning of 1906, a library has been started, and books are being read and discussed with intelligence. Slate writing in the infant room is excellent. 1907, the senior division commenced to use scribbler instead of slates, also map books. Continuing in 1907, the plant life of the district should occupy a more prominent place in the teaching of nature knowledge. In 1911, the following adjuncts to school equipment should be provided, a thermometer for each room, a mercury barometer, a large terrestrial globe, a magnetic compass, and a set of weights and measures and a simple balance. And then we can see later on that year in 1911, barometer, 2 thermometers, compass, globe, weights and measures received at the school this week. So just to see those things that the inspectors coming in would go, this would help you explain these subjects. It was interesting to note in the report for Dawes School in 1874, that states that the pupils' writing on slate was very good, but that they were behind when writing in pencil. Again, that changing technology that I think we think very much of technology as something that, my generation and below have lived with in school, with these huge changes of computers coming in, of having tablets in the classroom, iPads, all those kind of things. But I think we forget that for some of these generations, the move from slates to paper was a big change. Sometimes we can find entries that stray away from the normal, from the arithmetic, the English, the religious studies, and so on. And there are, of course, a lot of references to religious studies with ministers coming in, assessing the school, and so on. But we can sometimes find some more unusual examples. So here are some examples of that. This one is from Ferndonald in 1929. 26th of April 1929, Miss Macpherson, dairying and poultry mistress, has this week commenced a series of poultry lessons for children over 12 in the school and 2 girls in the district who recently left the school. So, a dairying and poultry instructress. That's quite hard to say. This one is from Glenhurich in 1949, so this is held in our Lochaber Archive Centre. This week is Animals Week. Lessons have been given on kindness to animals. In Lochallan in 1930, another one from Lochaber, nature knowledge lesson on the daffodil and drawing of the flower was given in school today. The senior pupils began to study the triangle in the advanced division. So you get these little hints of, yes, there's nature knowledge, or yes, there's those bigger subjects, but sometimes in the logbooks you can find specifics. They've spent a day looking at daffodils today. This is a favourite one from Borg School, so this is held in our nuclear and Caithness archives relating to a Caithness school. This is from the 1950s. 1954, primary 1, 2 and 3, making plasticine articles, boats from walnut shells and conkers. Primary 4, making cardboard articles, clay modelling. Primary 5, making wool rugs, house modelling in plasticine, singing together from the wireless programme, Christmas carols, Dashing White Sergeant, The Holly and the Ivy, Collar Herring, Shepherd and his dog, Sweet Nightingale, Nut Brown Maiden, and Kelvin Grove. So just interesting that looks, I don't have the exact date of that, but I'm guessing it's around Christmas when they're singing carols from the radio, and they're making these little walnut shell boats and little toys and things. 1959 at the same school, primary 2, holding the needle, use of thimble, simple tacking stitch, knitting of plain stitch with thick pins and thick wool. Primary 3, cutting out and tacking, laying of hem, plain knitting with 2 pins, scarf, pixie. Primary 6, cutting out of blouse, tacking and running stitches. Also primary 6, sewing of French seams, knitting ankle socks, plain and pearl, physical exercises from the wireless programme. And again, we see that technology coming in. They've now got access to this radio programme that can change how they teach in the classroom. And of course, as I mentioned right at the beginning with that Inverness Royal Academy extract with the war happening on the continent in the 1790s, lessons can sometimes be shaped entirely by what is going on in the world. In the Lochinver School logbook of 1915, we can see the class being given a science lesson on the properties of moss. They then go to the Coolagh plantation in 7 squads and gather sphagnum moss for war dressings. Now we see that a lot through First World War, that schools are going out and collecting mosses to be used in dressings for war wounds. But interesting there that they've incorporated that into a science lesson. They've taught them about mosses, about why they're doing it and how this can be used. In 1941, we see pupils at the John O'Groats School doing less nature study, less drawing, and more work in the school garden, planting vegetables as part of the Dig for Victory campaign. And staying in Caithness to end this episode, sometimes you are lucky enough to find real in-depth information about much of the work covered in an individual school. We have class structures for Kilminster School which show, I'm saying that and I think it'll be Kilminster, I'm sure someone from Caithness will correct me, which show the variety of work expected in each subject at each level of the school. And here are some of the extracts that Jen, my colleague at Nucleus, wrote for me. The drawing scheme for the school from 1904 shows the kind of work practised. It looks a bit like a mixture of graphic communications and art. Infants and junior division, free drawing on blackboard with chalk, drawing from the actual object, including perspective and memory drawing. Senior division, free drawing on blackboard and paper with chalk and charcoal, drawing from actual objects, including perspective, memory drawing, T and set squares for scale drawing and dimensional sketches, plane, geometry, plans and elevations of straight-edge solids. The scheme from 1910 for the school is not split into divisional work, but instead covers broadly the subjects and themes covered by nature knowledge, including weights and measures, growth of plants, common neighbourhood trees, signs of spring, summer, winter. I don't know why autumn doesn't get a look in there, but bird migration, farm work, food by roots and leaves, insects and other creatures, a feeing market, effects of frost and snow on land, animals and plants, sources of heat, combustion and friction, causes of day and night, herring fishing and trawling, to name just a few. And Jen goes on to say, you can see how varied this is, but also just how useful these lessons would be to children living in a rural area. They are learning not just how the world worked, but also useful skills for living in it, such as how a feeing market worked, ideal for finding jobs when they're older, aspects of farm work and fishing, what the herring industry is bringing, all to sustain and support themselves. The scheme for sewing has no date, but it does cover what would be expected from each class on the subject. Infants would be required to do hemming on items such as a handkerchief or apron and plain knitting. Standards 1 and 2, hemming and overseaming on such as lap bags, pillowcases, and plain knitting. Standards 3 and 4, hemming, overseaming, and gathering chemise or knickers, as well as plain and purled knitting. Also plain sewing stitches, patching of cotton, print and flannel, knitting stockings and darning. While most of these would now be considered hobbies, Jen says, rather than essential knowledge, they would have been considered vital for children to learn at an early age, when they would go on to be making and mending all of their own clothes, as well as those of their families. And we see that taking of the curriculum to suit the area. We see that in other places as well. There are papers in the County of Inverness school files about the need to train boys in the Malig area in cookery so that they could go to sea and join the fishing industry, and they needed to have those skills around feeding themselves. Anyway, I could keep going on forever, and I'm astonished that I haven't gone on longer than I have. So I'm going to stop, but I hope you found that interesting. Maybe some food for thought in there as well. I hope you can join me next week. Next week I'll be looking at the story of midwives, particularly around, we hold a manual from the 1790s. 1790s, I think it might be before that, from the 1700s anyway, a manual of midwifery, and we'll be talking a little bit about that. A reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer, that High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're really grateful for that. And if I don't speak to you before, I'll speak to you next week. Thank you.